My name's Tao Zhang. This is my colleague Richard here. Kaylee Hutchins, the original presenter, she has actually another presentation in another room, so unfortunately she will not be here. But we have a presentation tomorrow at 8:30 with Kelly, so you're welcome to come to that session. But this session is a little bit different. This is about testing, evaluating web applications that are accessible for those with disabilities and how to kind of get started in that process. And tomorrow's presentation is more about developing applications that are accessible, best practices, things you can do that you can start small but will make a big impact in your development process. So this one is more of a hands-on workshop style. So like I said, if you bring your laptop, feel free to follow me in the process, and then we just go along with the process here. So first, what is accessibility? Accessibility actually is just to make content usable for as many people as possible. There's a stats that's well known. About 15% of world population, they live with some form of disability. So if you convert that percentage into the actual number, it's pretty big. It's 1 billion people. You know, the Chinese population is 1.6 billion people. So it's really like 70% of Chinese people. So it's like a huge market if you want to deliver your product to all the people. In the US, 1 of 5 adults has a disability. Again, that's like a huge percentage of number of people. And disabilities is not just about people sitting in wheelchair. It has different forms, different types, different degrees, physical, mental, vision, hearing challenges, and more. So it also, disabilities is also about cognitive impairment. So people may have reading difficulties or some other type of under perception issues. So it covers a lot of different group of people. And then I just want to point out, inevitably, everyone grows old, right? We all experience some kind of age-related impairments that can affect how we use the web. So accessibility is really for everyone. In other words, everyone should be able to browse and navigate and interact with the content on the web. That's how the internet was developed in the first place. One good analogy is you don't want to just build a bridge that can only allow a certain type of car to pass. You need to build a bridge that every car can pass, right? And then also disability is not about permanent impairment. Sometimes it could be situational or temporal. Maybe you're holding a baby while using a phone, or maybe you're in a crowded bus trying to get hold of the handrail, still using your phone. Or maybe you're in a crowded office environment. You cannot hear the sound from the video. You have to turn off the sound. You need to rely on the caption to understand the video. So it could be all kinds of situations that you will need accessibility features for you to be able to use the content. And why is accessibility important? Like I said, the power of the internet is really for everyone, right? So everyone should be able to use the internet, use the web content without any difficulties. And certain type of organizations like government, education, or nonprofit organizations, they have more requirements by the law to make their content accessible. They have to comply with all kinds of accessibility regulations. So if you work with the government, you probably understand that accessibility is a big requirement from the government. Also, accessibility interface is about the user experience, actually. So I was reading an article last week about the complaints that people with disabilities often have. So I have a list here. So like lack of video captions, motion, animation, cluttered pages, wall of text, small text, zooming problems, low contrast, relying only on color, mouse-focused sites, so you cannot use keyboard at all. You have to use a mouse. So really, all those issues, not only people with disabilities will find challenging to use the web, but also it affects everyone. So if you fix those issues, it just make your website user experience better. So good accessibility is about good user experience. So we at Esri, we're trying to make our products more inclusive. I work on the accessibility efforts for RGS Online, but we have colleagues who work on mobile accessibility, and Richard is part of the pro team, so he works on the desktop accessibility. So across the board, we're trying to make the accessibility knowledge spread out in the company. We're trying to educate, help our designer, developers better understand accessibility and help them integrate accessibility into our process. And for every new page we design, especially for RGS Online, we try to build the accessibility support from the start. And we're also going back to our legacy features, legacy pages, and try to, when we redesign them, we make sure we have the accessibility support in those new designs. We know we're still a far way, we still have a long way to go. But as you can see the screenshot here, we integrate some new accessibility features into story maps. We also have a group on GeoNet that's focused on accessibility. So really feel free to jump into that group and talk about your challenges or maybe ask us questions about accessibility, even put in your feature request and say, hey, I know this web application is not accessible. Can Esri help fix it? We really welcome those kind of discussions. So I know for a beginner, this is kind of the process I went through. Accessibility can be really daunting. With all the best intentions in the world, you still need to face a huge learning curve to understand all those requirements, success criteria. So building a fully accessible, compliant website the effort could be huge. So today I'm going to cover some basic background information and also a simple testing workflow that I went through. That's how I learned accessibility. Hopefully, you can learn a little bit from this process and integrate what you learned today into your design or development process. So you can start from small, but still you can make a huge difference. So first, why do we need to do accessibility testing? Or why is accessibility testing the first thing you need to do? Because I think accessibility is about the experience of users. Right, and testing is probably the only way to ensure the experience is accessible. So it's a really great way to learn about accessibility while discovering those issues and fixing those issues. A good thing about accessibility test is actually it's a functional test. So compared to usability test, which is more subjective, you have an objective specification, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guideline 2.0. So the goal is to verify your content against the goals, against the success criteria, and make sure the content function as what the specification says. So going back to the functional test part. So it is a functional test. It's an objective test, so anyone can do it. So it doesn't require a lot of subjective judgment compared to, again, usability test. I'm not saying usability is bad, but this is sometimes easier to do than doing a usability test. So we talk about Web Content Accessibility Guideline 2.0. It's actually a huge document. I think it's 800 pages long. So I'm not going to talk about those 800 pages, but this is kind of like an overview of the guideline. So as you can see, the guideline has 4 principles. So the perceivable is the user should be able to perceive the information. The information cannot be visible to some of the senses. One personal story I had is I used to work in the university library. The library will scan papers for students to read, and they didn't do OCR. So some of the students they cannot use screen reader to read the PDF, because for screen reader, without the OCR, the PDF is just images. They cannot know the text beneath that image. So that's like a huge lesson for me, because as sighted user, we can see the PDF even though it's an image, but for non-sighted users, they cannot understand what the content is because it's just images. The second principle of the Web Content Accessibility Guideline is operable. So the user must be able to perform the action in the way the user can do. So you cannot ask the user must use the mouse to use the website. You have to provide a second way for keyboard users, right? And then the third principle is understandable. So the content or the interaction cannot be beyond the user's understanding, right? So you cannot write really difficult to understand sentences or text, or you cannot provide that information that is really challenging for a normal user to understand. And then the fourth principle is robust. So as the technology or the user's device evolve, the content should still be usable to the user, right? The screen reader technology is always behind the browser, so we have to keep that in mind. Even if you are using the latest technology, make sure you have a fallback to like normal browser or like original the technology that you use when you develop the content originally. So for each principle, there's multiple success criteria. And then for each criterion, you have different levels of compliance. So level A is the lowest level, and level AA, AAA, you go higher. Usually we recommend meeting the level AA requirement. AAA requirement could be could have high cost. For example, you need to have sign language interpretation for videos. That could be a challenging for some organizations. So this is the test process. I usually start with the automated test, and then I do keyboard test, screen reader test, and then finally I look at the color again. So for automated test, it is a great way to learn accessibility, because almost all the automated test tool you use, it will give you the issues and also the explanation of why that is an issue, and also give you suggestions to fix that issue. So it's a good way to learn about different kinds of accessibility issues. So I recommend using X, which is a JavaScript-based testing tool. You can use it into like continuous integration build testing or automated testing. You can run it from command line, or you can run from the browser as a plugin. The X tests the rendered browser DOM, which is different from some other testing tool, which tests the original code. Also, it tries to be really conservative, so it aims at no false positives. And itself, it's accessible. And it has really good documentation. So I have a practice site here. If you have your own laptop, feel free to open this URL and we can do some testing together. So let me give you guys a little bit of time to copy down the, sorry. Let me switch back. So hopefully you get that URL. If not, Richard can help you. Yeah. So this is the application here, right? So I'll just open up if you install X, it should be a tab in the developer tool. So you can just click on Analyze. It gives you the issues that the X find. And for each issue, you can look at the description, and then they tell you the impact. And there's Learn More link that you can click on, and it will give you more detailed information about why this is an issue, how to fix it. But there's like a simple suggestion on the right. It says to solve the violation, what you need to do here. So for example, here, the contrast is not sufficient, right? Yeah, so you can, if I resize this a bit, there's like a highlight button here, and it will highlight the part here, the search parks, right? And then if you stop the highlight and inspect the node, this is a new feature in Chrome. You can click on the color, and it will tell you the contrast ratio is 1.51, which is much lower than the required 4.5. And you can kind of adjust the color and see, hey, I'm accessible now. But really, you should work with your designer to find a better color for the text. But this is a quick way to debug the issue and then just fix the issue. Let's go on to the next one here. The image, this is pretty straightforward, right? It doesn't have alternate text, so the screen reader user will not be able to understand what the image is about. If the image is just for decoration purposes, we should set empty alternate text to make sure that screen reader know, okay, this is decorative. I don't need to understand the image. So yeah, the image only has the source, so we need to just add the alternate text here. So that's how you work with X is pretty simple. You can kind of combine X with the dev tool in the code here. So you can like modify the code locally and then run the X again and try to see if you fix that issue. The caveat of using X is if running X in the browser, is that you have to run against every page state. So if you have menus or if you have responsive navigation, you have to open an app and run X again. So feel free to run X with your own application and see how many issues you can find. And although X is really great, but no automated test tool can definitely prove conformance with any given WCAG success criteria. That's a mouthful sentence, but one example here is X cannot tell you though your alternate text is really meaningful or not. Maybe you have an image about a lake, and someone, for some reason, wrote that image is about a dog. X cannot tell you, hey, that's not correct, right? So you have to do manual verification. But automated testing is a really good starting point. It lets you start with some issues. You can dive deep into the issue and figure out a way to fix those issues. So the second step here is to do keyboard test. It's really simple. Keyboard users usually use Tab or Shift Tab to move keyboard focus. So the Tab key will tap on any interactive elements on the page. So like links, menu, button, form controls. And the way you click links using keyboard only is to press Enter. And for buttons, you can use Enter or space. And sometimes for menus or for option radio buttons, you can use the arrow key. But that's really it. So keyboard users rely on those keys to use the page. So the core part of the keyboard testing is really unplug your mouse or disable your Bluetooth mouse, wireless mouse, just to keyboard only. See if you can use the page. If not, there may be some problems, right? But there's some specification here. So from the WCAG success criteria. The first one is you need to be able to interact with all the controls on the page using keyboard only. And then the second one is that you need to see what items has the keyboard focus at all times. The keyboard focus is that blue outline when you tap to a button or link. Sometimes you will see designer or developer will disable it because they think that's ugly, but that's really important for keyboard users to understand where the keyboard focus is. And then the third outcome is the focus order should match the interaction order or the page order. So you cannot jump the focus around on the page, sometimes here, sometimes there. It's really hard for keyboard user to follow. So normally we recommend the focus order to follow the page order. So the way a normal user will read the page, right? From top to bottom, from left to right. The fourth outcome is no keyboard traps. Sometimes you will see when you tap to an area of a page, you cannot get out of it because there's some tricky tab index going on there that you cannot jump out of that section. That's really bad. But the only place you will need a keyboard trap is when you open up the dialog. You want the user to stay in that dialog until the user dismisses the dialog. That's the only place you need a keyboard trap. And then since we're doing a lot of responsive design or mobile-oriented design right now, you need to make sure anything the user cannot see, and they should not receive keyboard focus. So like if you have responsive navigation menu that's maybe hidden in the beginning, you shouldn't set focus to those menus. So let's jump back to the test app. Stop highlight. So I'm just trying to tap through this application and see if I can use the application at all. Then the first thing I tap to the web page is actually the fourth button. You know we have a problem here, right? The keyboard user cannot tap to the first three buttons there. So that might be a problem. Just pressing Enter key, see if I can filter the features. That works. So I can tap to the next button. That works too. Now I'm in the search input. It's kind of hard to see the focus outline, so maybe we could kind of adjust the visual design there a little bit. And I can tap to the search button, which is good. And then I don't know where my focus is. Okay, it's actually in the browser. So for some reason, it's hard for me to tap to the zoom in and zoom out, the home extent, and even the base map switch. So yeah, we may need to consider where the tab index is for those controls. Or maybe we need to adjust the order to make sure I can still tap to those controls. But that's how you test keyboard accessibility. There's also another website. It's the UK Government Digital Services. I'll give you a little bit of time to type the URL. Good. If not, Richard can help you guys.
Yeah. And if anyone's doing desktop accessibility, a lot of these same things kind of apply as well. Like you're using a lot of the same keyboard commands, the same types of testing. Mm-hmm. It's just different tools. But mainly the presentation's focused on web, but if anyone has questions on desktop.
Yeah, cool. So this is the focus order in run order. First link. Second link. So the second link is positioned to the right using some CSS, but you see the tab order is wrong, right? We should go through first link, third link, and second link. That's what the user can see. And then here you have the tab index greater than 0. It just skipped that link for some reason. So, and then here you have the link with no focus style. So I know I'm focused on that link, but I cannot see the focus ring. The reason I think is we disable the focus. We set focus outline to none, which is bad practice here. But there's a nice little thing that you can do here. You can write in the developer tool. You can write document .active element. It will tell you what your focus is right now. There's also a let's see. The enhanced focus. Basically, it's a JavaScript booklet that you can use. So on the left column here is the enhanced version. If you apply that booklet, it basically adds CSS on the fly to links, buttons. Let me stop the key casting so you can see it. Right, so it's more visible. And this is the default focus outline. It kind of blurs a little bit. So I understand a lot of people don't like the browser's default focus ring. So you can definitely come up with your own visual style for the focus ring. And the right column there is the focus, how it will look like if the focus ring is removed. So I cannot see where my focus is right now because it's removed. But you can use that trick, the force to show focus, to override, and then so you will see the enhanced focus outline, like on the left. So there's different tools that can help you diagnose your keyboard focus issues. Okay. So we talk about running the automated testing. We talk about using keyboard test. The third step is to run screen reader test. So what is a screen reader? Screen reader is basically a type of assistive technology that reads the web content and convey the content to non-sighted users. So in Mac, has the screen reader called VoiceOver. It's built into the system. VoiceOver works the best with Mac's default browser Safari. And in Windows, you have the option of a free screen reader called NVDA. It works the best with Firefox, according to the survey. And in Windows, you can have another option. It's called JAWS, but the license is kind of expensive. JAWS traditionally works well with IE and Edge. And in desktop, we're using JAWS. We're using
JAWS. It is a little bit difficult to work with, and the license is expensive, so we have to switch licenses between product engineers and testers. We do sometimes use the default Windows narrator, but I've crashed that so many times. It's not reliable. It's not a reliable tool.
Okay. Yeah.
Also, Windows Inspect. If you're that's just a Microsoft tool that we use for any Windows desktop applications.
Yeah. And then if you use a mobile device, I think there's a mobile version of VoiceOver in iPhone. Android has the versions called TalkOver, I think. It's the same type of technology. So for a lot of screen readers, you have to use keyboard, right? Because for non-sighted user, keyboard is their main input tool. So a lot of screen readers require a special key. We call it modifier key. And you use that key combined with another key or multiple keys to initiate command. So for example, for VoiceOver, if you need to turn on, it's command F5. And turn off is also command F5. But sometimes, like for NVIDIA and JAWS, turn on and turn off is a different key command. So you kind of have to remember a little bit. And VoiceOver's modifier key is Control plus option. For NVIDIA and JAWS, default the modifier key is number pad insert. I have a list of the VoiceOver commands, the NVIDIA commands, JAWS commands, and some basic commands for testing accessibility on this slide. I'm not going to show this slide, but after this presentation, we'll make the PowerPoint presentation available to you, so you can download and follow the link there. I'm just focusing on VoiceOver for the sake of time here. If you need to use VoiceOver to read content on the page, usually it's the VoiceOver key plus left and right arrow key. So it's Command Option plus left arrow or plus right arrow. Of course, you can still use Tab key to tab to things, and VoiceOver will tell you what your focus is. And then you can stop the reading by pressing the Control key. If you need to click the link or button or form controls, you use VoiceOver plus space key. And another really good tool in VoiceOver is called Rotor. So you use VoiceOver plus U to open that rotor, and you can see a lot of good information about the page. I'll demonstrate that in a bit. But the testing coverage using screen reader, first, I usually cover the navigation. So look at the headings, look at the links, landmarks, menus, make sure I can use VoiceOver or screen reader to access those navigation parts. And then I look at the content, especially images. Does image have alternate text? Can I use the screen reader to read the table? Which is sometimes challenging because not all the tables are written using the native HTML table elements. You'll see people write table in div, span, some other elements, which is not semantic. So will be a challenge for screen reader to understand that is a table. And for charts, usually at Esri we provide a hidden table for charts. So screen reader can, even though they can understand the chart, they can still read the data behind the chart. For interaction, so use screen reader to fill in the form and see if I can work with the form. Use the screen reader to open up the dialog, see if I can read the information in the dialog. Messages, right? Sometimes the message will show up in 5 seconds and disappear, and see if screen reader can detect that change and read back the message to the user. And the last part is widget. So by widget, I mean anything that's not native in HTML. So even tabs are not native in HTML. So we have to write our own tab widget. So in the test the widget using your screen reader and make sure you can understand it, you can use it. So speaking of widget, there's a good document on the web. It's called Area Also in Practice. It is also long, but let me show you how I use it. Right here. So I mainly look at the design patterns and widgets section here. So let's say I'm working on a tabs widget, right? So I click on this. It gives you a list of the expected keyboard interaction. So I use this to test the prototype my developer develops, right? And then I just follow this, use as a checklist. Make sure the prototype or the component support all those keyboard interactions. If not, I'll work with my developer to implement those missing interactions. And then there's also the area roles and states and properties that we need to add to the code. This is just make sure the screen reader can understand that, hey, this is the tab list. This is the tab, which tab is currently active. How many tabs do you have? So we will need to add this to the HTML code. The good thing is if you run X will often detect those missing area states or rows. But it's good to have this complete document as a reference and just to make sure you cover everything. So don't feel like this is a long document, you have to read everything. Just pick and choose whatever that's relevant to your application. And then for a lot of the patterns here, there's also examples that you can see how this widget is implemented in an accessible way. So for example, actually a good example here is the dialog. this model dialog example. So if I open it and my focus is set to the first input field, if I start tabbing, it goes through all the fields and buttons, and then comes back to the first element. So this is the keyboard trap I was talking about earlier, right? So as long as the user is still working on this dialog, the focus is trapped in the dialog until I dismiss it. And when I dismiss it, my focus is going back to the button that opens the dialog. So I can continue on my work on this page. So this is really good accessible pattern that we try to follow. So the next thing is to practice the screen reader with the app that I have. It always makes me nervous because last year when I demoed the screen reader, there's some issues here. But I'll try it this time. So I'm using Mac, I'm using Safari. So to open up the screen reader, I press Command F5.
VoiceOver on Safari, Park Locator, window, toolbar has keyboard focus. You are currently on a toolbar. To interact with the items on this toolbar, press Control, Option, Shift, down arrow.
I have to say I'm using really slow speed of screen reader for testing purposes. I've seen non-sighted user using screen reader, the speed is much faster. So this is not how a disabled user will use the screen reader. This is just for me to use as a test tool. So if I start, Control Option Shift down arrow.
In toolbar, 6 items, go sidebar, services beta, show, leaving toolbar.
Okay, so
dog friendly toggle button. You are currently on a toggle button inside of web content.
I try and stop it. So the same problem, right, as the keyboard test. I'm focused on this third button.
Group. You are box. You are bike trail toggle button. Horse trail toggle button. Search, edit text, enter park name, search. You are currently on a text field. To enter text in this field, type. Search button, search.
Let me do a search.
Edit text, enter park name, search. A-K-E. You lake. At Wonderland Lake, 4,201 newtons. Wonderland Lake, 4,201 newtons. Broadway. You are currently on a text end of search. Clear search.
And I can use the VoiceOver key plus the arrow key
to click this button
to move to the content.
You are currently on a banner
content.
Inside of web content. Heading level 1, Wonderland Lake. Close button. End of banner. Wonderland Lake trailhead is located at 4,201 newtons. Broadway at an elevation of 5,510 feet.
It's too fast.
You are currently on text element.
Yeah, but this is how you read the web application. But I'm going to demo you give you a demo of the router I was talking about. So Control Option plus U.
Links menu.
It detects every link on the page. Apparently we only have one link here.
Esri. Headings menu.
And then it detects all the headings on this page. And then you notice that we have 2 H1 headings, which is against the best practice on the page, right? So you can tell some of the issues here.
Form controls menu.
And form control.
Zoom in button.
Okay, here I can access to the zoom button.
Zoom out button. Home button. Toggle base map button. Picnic area toggle button.
Hey, I can also access to the third button, which didn't have the focus input.
Dog friendly toggle, bike trail toggle, but horse trail Wonderland Lake. 4th clear search button.
And then I think the
no
next
items
one
in red spot landmarks menu.
And then landmarks. This is part of the HTML5 spec that you can assign different landmarks to on the page. This is actually really helpful for screen reader users.
Banner.
So banner,
search.
For some reason, we have 2 landmarks for search.
Banner.
This should not be a banner. Banner is usually the header of the page. So you can see there's some issue that we can improve on.
No items in article landmarks menu. Closing landmarks menu. Wonderland Lake Trail has VoiceOver off.
Reader. So there's a bunch of videos on YouTube that you can search and find and tell you how to use VoiceOver for accessibility testing. It's like 10 minutes long. But you just need to understand those basic commands. You don't have to really understand those really complex commands that a disabled user will use. But I think it's good enough that I use this to testing accessibility. apologize for the quick speed of the screen reader. Okay, so the last step is to do color test. The X plugin can actually tell you a lot about the color contrast issues like we saw, but still it's worthwhile to do a manual verification. So one of the expected outcome is not use presentations or interactions that rely only on color. So for example, if you have input field and the user makes an error on the input field, if you just turn that input field into red without any other message, it's not accessible because people with low vision or color blindness will not detect that red. For them, it doesn't change at all. So they will not know that there's an error in that input field. So you need to combine the color with some other design elements like icons or text message to let the user know that, hey, there's an error there. And then the color contrast ratio that we talked about, for normal text, the color contrast ratio should be higher than 4.5. So there's tools that you can use to calculate the color contrast, which I will show you. Going back to the test case here, I already showed you using the Chrome's dev tool that you can look at the color and you get a sense of whether the color has enough contrast. But in the past, what I did is I just copied the color code here. And this is a tool I find online. It's good. So you just type in the background and the text color in here, and it will calculate the color contrast ratio. And it says, hey, we have color contrast ratio of 6, which passes the AA and for any size of the text, and AAA for large text. If it's lighter color, you will get a warning and say, hey, it's lower than 4.5. And then you can work with your designer to figure out a better color. Yeah, so this is the tool I was just demoing. Okay. So as a summary, right? So we usually start with the automated testing. Not only automated testing can give you things to start with, but also it's a great learning tool because you can look at the documentation, understand why that tool thinks that's an issue. The tool usually provides some suggestions for you to fix the issue. And then you do keyboard testing, which is really simple, right? Just disconnect your mouse, use the keyboard only to use the page and see if it works. Use screen reader, which requires a little bit of learning, but I'm sure it's really worth it. And then color test, manually check the color if you're using only color to convey the information, and then make sure, because sometimes the automation tool cannot detect text on images, or if the background has some gradient, it's really hard for the auto test tool to detect. So you have to manually verify those cases. But behind all this, there's a need for us to understand the VCAC. I know it's a long document, but you will learn by following this process and learn piece by piece. Then you have a better understanding of the document. And I found a really good website that talks about the VCAC in a way that normal people can understand, because the official documentation has a lot of like terminology or jargons. Sometimes it's really hard to understand. But this one actually, it's written in a way that for developers or designers can easily understand. If you just look at one of the criteria here, right, it's much shorter. It's just one page for each criterion. It's really easy to understand. They talk about what to do, some tips, and some related criteria. So the first time I read through all this, it took me just like a whole afternoon. So it's not just several hours of work. You just need to set a time, read it, get an overview of VCAG, and then when you start doing the testing, you will have a better understanding of what those criteria are about. And then I think for a lot of our applications, we need to develop some kind of custom widget. So going back to the sorry, trying to find that one. Oh, yeah. I think I lost track of that, but going back to the area best practice document. So just scan the list of widgets and see if there are any pattern that you can use. One thing I find challenging is the tree view widget. So for a sighted user, you know that's a hierarchical tree, but it's very challenging for a screen reader user to understand the labels of the tree, which label is active, which label, whether the tree supports single select, multi-select. We are still having some difficulty making that work. So if you know a good solution, let me know. And I just want to conclude the presentation here by saying the ultimate decision for whether something is really accessible is whether or not people can use it. So if you have the chance to work with people with disabilities, like really work with them in person and ask them to use your application and see what issues or challenges they have. The things I talked about, automated testing, keyboard testing, screen reader test, is for us to test our applications. I know, like I said, the way I use screen reader is totally different from a disabled user using screen reader. So if you have the chance to work with a real user, feel free to do so. That's the ultimate decision maker for you. And if you want to learn more about accessibility, we have another presentation tomorrow at 8:30. I know it's early after the party tonight, but hopefully you can make it. Tomorrow's presentation is more about how to develop applications for accessibility. So we will talk about a lot of things that are relevant to a developer, how to use ARIA, how to make sure your application is 508 compliant. And we talk about the best practices, the patterns that we use in our Esri products. So tomorrow 8:30, and Smoke Tree, A2E. And I'm part of the Creative Lab UX UI team, so we have a bunch of other presentations throughout Dev Summit. So in addition to the accessibility presentation tomorrow, we have another one that's about usability testing, which is subjective, but feel free to go to that presentation to learn more about usability testing. And then please take the survey, give us feedback so we can do better next time. And that's all for my presentation. So I'll open up the floor for questions.
Yep.
Yes.
Is there any special considerations for users who read right to left?
So the question is there any special consideration for right to left languages? In general, I don't think there's any special requirement. And for every product, we always need to consider left to right to left. So we just test it in the same way that we test left to right language with right to left language. Yeah. Yes.
Can you talk like the state of the JavaScript API? It seems like in the 4.x series they've done a lot better with accessibility widgets and such. And
Yes.
how close are you to kind of saying you're there?
Right. The question is about JavaScript API 4.x versus the legacy 3.x API. So yeah, we've done a lot of accessibility efforts for 4.x API. So like a lot of the widget, like we have layer list, print widget, direction widget, they're all accessible. I tested. So, but for 3.x, I think there's definitely like a priority issue We'll try to fix issues that our user report as we go, but I think our main focus is on 4.x API. Yeah, at this point.
You would say the 4.x API is pretty complete in terms of its accessibility. Are there widgets that we should avoid?
No, I think most of them are pretty accessible. Yep. Yes.
With the tool like Web App Builder, users are
Right.
what's the equivalent in terms of accessibility from
Cool. Yeah, the question is about Web App Builder accessibility. I'm actually just started working with the Web App Builder team to give them more accessibility support. I know there's a lot of widgets or their own interface. Actually, there's some accessibility issues. I think the team started realizing that priority, and they're allocating resources, working with our internal accessibility experts to fix those issues.
So does that apply to the tool itself or also the output from the tool?
Yes, both. So the Web App Builder UI itself, I think they're considering a complete redesign of that UI. So I'll definitely make sure we have accessibility built into that. And all the different kinds of widget, I think some of the widgets are written in a way that are not semantic, which definitely affects accessibility. So moving forward, we'll start testing and give them guidance, suggestions to fix those issues. Yeah. Any other questions?
Any desktop questions? No. No one builds desktop add-ins anymore. Come on. No Arc Object developers. Wow. I'm outdated.
Yeah, so like I said, we have this accessibility group on GeoNet, which is relatively new. So feel free to ask questions there, share resource, talk to us about your accessibility needs. Well, thanks.